Everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. Hello, Louise. And I cannot thank Jamie enough for setting the technical side of this up, and also Rich Whiskey, who really is so great about sharing resources and making introductions to people, to all of us, and encouraging us to do things. I've listened to a couple of Jamie's webinars from Ohio, or I watched the YouTube recording, and I've really enjoyed the webinars on MSU and Megan Milbrath. So Rich said, "Hey, Carrie, how about one more thing on your plate?" As if making sourdough bread every day and doing everything around the house and all of our bees isn't enough. I said, sure, why not? So Jamie graciously agreed. I reached out to some of the members. No, I did not send a group email about, I feel a lot of us already had great instruction about overwintered hives and installing nooks, and said, all right, well, what would you like to know? What is it there as it pertains to May? I attended the SEMBA meeting where Jamie spoke, and he referenced this one website. And I, for one, always like to know, we talk about nectar flow, and if you go to this website from Ohio State, you could just plug in the closest zip code to the north, to Michigan, and we're just going to be a few days behind. So I went there, and it was a little confusing to me. So I admit that now. And I said to him, I thought maybe it's a great resource, maybe a little bit more layman's terms. Maybe I just didn't understand. I suspect Louise would know this website really well. Most of the trees and everything were in Latin. So we put out some subjects that I thought would be pertinent to now for May. And it wasn't about, we should know with overwintering, we know what's going on this week. And if you've had nooks, or if you've had packages, you've probably already installed them. So I hope everyone is doing well and everyone is safe and all your loved ones are safe. Let me just preface with that. And I'm sorry if I've been a little distant. I have had a loss in my family, so I've just been a bit off. So I apologize for that. Jamie, on a happy note, take it away.
Thank you very much. I put out a survey, and it says, how easy was it for you to log into this presentation? We're just trying to give out a lot of direction on because it's going to be this way for a while. And I hope and pray it's going to be a short time. But for now, I want to make it easier to get some direction out there, some information to you guys to make this easy to hop on everybody's kind of Zoom calls. On to spring and summer management. These are the questions that were sent to me, and what I done is made a personal one up for you guys tonight, and explaining everything that was kind of on that list. And we'll just go ahead and click down through each one. A little bit about myself for those of you that don't know me. I started out as a Defiance County Master Gardener, went into OCVN, which is Ohio Certified Volunteer Naturalist, and found an eagle red-tailed hawk that came to the backyard. I got into beekeeping at that time and became a lifetime member because it was something that intrigued me. I do things for about a 5-year rotation. If it doesn't challenge me, it gets boring and I quit. I got my private applicator's license, went on to instrumental insemination at Purdue University. And I'm an OSU pollinator specialist, where we go around and it's a glorified tree hugger, environmentalist, and micro environment on top of that. I became the Defiance County Apiary Inspector that I've been doing now for this will be my 5th year, I'm now an OSBA Director and the traveling speaker. I also put out the Hive Digest, the quarterly newsletter, and then through a bunch of conversations, they asked me to start doing a live show. So now the 2nd and 4th Sunday of every month, I'll send Carrie the link on this that everybody is welcome. You can log in the same way with this Zoom. And our next speaker will be Dwight Wells, talking about honeybee nutrition. Won a few awards in between then, in 2017, 2018. My biggest claim to fame, as we turn around put together the Pollinator Sanctuary and Training Facility in Defiance County. and we won the NACO award in Las Vegas, and we were first place in agriculture for outreach and training. On to Carrie's question. We're going to cover it here in these two. The best thing for you to understand in being a beekeeper is AccuWeather. I know it's the only job that the weatherman or weather lady can constantly get wrong, but it gives us what our bees are doing on a daily basis with the temperatures. What are your bees doing? Are they clustering? Right now, I just grafted over 100 queens yesterday, and we have a cold. So are they in that cleansing flight? Are they able to get out? And on the other end of that, is it too hot? You can actually kill a hive by going in when it's 90 plus degrees. And if it's hot and humid, they're pulling in water and putting it into a swamp cooler and making an air conditioner. If you're in there pulling out frames of brood, they're overly hot enough. They're bearding out the front, and you can actually kill a hive. So when you go to AccuWeather, you can get that monthly type report, and it's going to give you a ballpark figure of, is it going to be okay to turn on and set out swarm hives? And that's what I'd be doing right now. You guys are probably 2 weeks behind us, or maybe a week, and we're getting swarming right now. Everything out has eggs in the cells and the queen cups. We have queen cells out. A few of my friends and I from the area and people that I know a little bit south of me are out catching swarms already. The disclaimer to this is every bee will be different. Even though we say the bees will do this at a certain temperature, some people say they've seen their bees at 40 some odd degrees come out, take a cleansing flight, and right back in. So that is completely up to the bee and the breed. The AccuWeather. This is GDD. This is a site that it is the phenology chart for what comes into bloom for X amount of days at X amount of weather. So right now, I just typed this in today on at 4 or 5, and we were at 54. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this away 1 second, and I'm going to show you the website for this. So it's the Ohio State University's phenology chart. If you have a zip code that's close to yours, you can type in the day's date, type in that zip code, and it's only for Ohio, so I do apologize for that. So if you type that in and hit go, this is going to tell me now that Defiance County is at 180, and everything's in full bloom. So for the PJM, the rhododendron, it's in full bloom. The weeping Higgin cherry, is in full bloom, and it's telling me that there's also pests. So this gives you a phenology chart of a lot of different things. The Ohio Pollinator Specialist, we put that together. There's a lot of us throughout. There's like 160 of us throughout Ohio, and we go out constantly on the weekends and we see what's in bloom. As we do that, we all report back to OSU, and that gives a different zip code, and that tells what's coming into bloom and what's not. So with this, as I chart my things on here, there's quite a bit of honeybee pollinating stuff in here, but we're trying to put in more for the beekeepers. So you'll know when the mason bees come out, the leaf cutter bees, the blue orchard bees, and those things are going to come into this chart also. So what it does is when it checks the weather, there's weather stations that they also monitor on a monthly and a weekly basis. Sometimes those are hourly. The glossary itself, and it breaks down the GG or GDD. So it tells you the threshold, the modification. So each day that's over 50 degrees, they take the highest and the lowest temps, the mean and the base, and they put that on a chart, and it tells when things start to come into bloom. So they know that maples, sugar maples, are just about the first thing that come into bloom in this chart. So you can scroll down through here, and if you get into the science of it, you can see the growth rate, and then it really gets on the science side of this. The glossary side, and then there's the summary. And the summary just breaks everything down. Last year at this time, in 2019, we only had 191 because it was that cold, wet, and rainy. If we go back to 2017, I was actually producing queens in March, but it was 370. We had that nice spring. It was nice in March all through April, and we were actually booming right along. So you'll see this ebb and flow as things change. And we'll go back to the PowerPoint. So when you see this, you can type in that date. So if you have a zip code that's close to you, you can actually tell when your nectar flow is going to start kicking in. I'm going to jump on the Varroa 1 minute. So for this, we can all agree, and I want you all to agree with me, that you cannot raise honey or get honey from sick bees. I cannot raise queens from sick bees. I cannot make divisions or splits from sick bees. So on this, we need to monitor monthly. And I was an inspector when we used to do the the sugar roll, excuse me. You take the powdered sugar inside the container. You would roll your bees. Some people would roll the bees nice and slow because why did we do it? We didn't want to kill the bees. But for the second and third year of being an inspector, I did an alcohol wash and I done a sugar roll. The sugar roll is inconsistent. It depends how much you shake it. I took different things from shaking it, put it out in the sun, let it sit for 5 minutes, taking everybody's recommendations, and then would also take those bees and put them in an alcohol wash, and the alcohol wash always came out with true numbers. Here's the problem. When people say, I'm going to kill 300 bees or 1/2 cup of my bees, the easiest thing, I hate to sell projects or sell products, excuse me, it's the easy check. You can still do this with a mason jar. You can still do this with a little screen. Anything you can do to do it. But what you're doing, you're wasting those 300
Carrie.
bees. All right, let me put somebody on mute. When you turn around and do an alcohol wash, you're taking those 300 bees and you're putting them on a chart and you're knowing so at the beginning of every month, middle of every month, or end of every month. Do an alcohol wash. This is just like going to the doctor's office and getting a monthly checkup. The 300 sample of those bees that you took is saving 60 to 80 plus thousand bees so you can get a product or have something out of it. If you have sick bees, there's nothing that we can do other than to run and buy more packages or buy more nukes. So in this sample, this was a sample was down the road for me. A commercial beekeeper came in, he lost 800 hives in less than about a year and a half. That was 162 mites per 300 in the sample. In that, snotty brood, the queen was laying out profusely, laying eggs to try to outrun this disease. It was snotty brood, things were just absolute overtaken. Compared to another sample I took, this gentleman was down to 7. And that was me. When I took my bees down to Tennessee, I took 100 hives. If you don't understand how this works, please go to the Varroa Guide at Honeybee Health Coalition. There's a 32-page PDF. They have videos. They also have an app. So if you don't understand, what do you need to do? So right now you want honey. 90% of everybody in this business wants honey. What can I put on? Mite-Away Quick Strips, Hop Guard, Formic Pro. You can't put on Apivar or Apistan. It's the wrong time to hit them with oxalic. So this is going to give you the PPE or the personal protection equipment that you need to use with that, and what's the efficacy or kill rate of that product. So talk with your club presidents, your officers, and understand that book. And if not, if you're more than welcome to, give me a call and I'll be glad to help you. But every micro environment or area is going to see that ebb and flow of mites up or down. Some other samples I took, and this is what you're doing. You're evaluating if your bees need even a treatment. Don't hit them with the treatment that they don't need. So for years, that when I was a rookie beekeeper in my second, third year, we treated in the spring and treated in the fall, no matter what. Back then, we just used powdered sugar. Powdered sugar, they said, put a half a pound of powdered sugar, sprinkle it all over the hive, and it would help get rid of mites. That was some of the stuff that was coming out until we started seeing the science behind it. So what you're doing is you're evaluating your bees, even if you need to give them a treatment. Then you're recording that treatment. So what you need to do is try and do it with a iPad, a cell phone, a recorder. If you have a partner with you that can write the notes while you're doing it, that's a good thing to do. And then IPM is integrated pest management. That's telling you that, do I need to do something, or can I just let the bees go because this is early in the season? The mite count only might be at 2 or 3, and you don't need to treat. But remember, your max through USDA and ODA, and Michigan goes right along with that also, is 9 mites per 300 bees, which is a half a cup. So what you do is you try and take a frame of open brood, that is the older larvae. You're shaking that into a bucket. First, back up. So you're checking for the queen on that frame first. And you're going to check it at least 3 times. This queen does not fly, she does not lay eggs, and she does not produce after doing an alcohol wash. Once you're confirmed that that queen's not on that frame, you thump it in the bottom of a container. The forage bees will fly out. The nurse bees will gather at the bottom. You take a half a cup, put it in your container, and take your sample. The integrated pest management, and one of the questions was the green drone comb, does it work? Yes, it does. I use them in all my hives. You do not put it directly in the brood area. So if on a 10 frame box, you don't stick it in that 4, 5, and 6 area. You stick it a little bit to the outside, right before that pollen and honey on the outside. The drones like it a little bit cooler. I can use this in May, June, July, and up to August because the queen is laying drones up to that point because they're trying to proliferate and they're trying to grow and they want to swarm. So is that useful? Yes. But the thing is, when you put it in, put that green drone comb in, and then once you see eggs, pull that frame out on the 20th day. So we all know that drones take 24 days to emerge. I want to take it on that 19th or 20th day when all the mites are collecting into the drones because they like the drone cells better because they gestate 3 more days more than the workers. So I'm going to take that, stick it in a freezer, and freeze it for 48 hours. You can leave that frame out of your colony. They will not burr comb back that in that quickly. Thaw that frame out. Take your hive pick tool that we've all seen, like the honey scratchers, I've heard them called pick tools, shove them through the heads of the drones and pull them out and see what the mite count is, or just it's going to give you a rough. Do you see only 1 or 2, or do you see thousands? So then you need to turn around and treat. If so, the hive warmer, I have a few people in my area and a few people that I know that use it very successfully. Oxalic is when they're brood less. So if you catch a swarm, an early swarm in the spring, you just caught a swarm yesterday. They're broodless. Time to hit them with oxalic because of any phoretic mites they're climbing around. Mite away quick strips, organic, but also it's a chemical. Use nitrile gloves and a respirator if you can, because you don't want to tear that open and catch a big whiff of it. Apistan, a little bit heavier sledgehammer. Apivar, same way, and Hopguard, and they all come with directions, and please follow the directions in the PPE. We all want, every time you go in your hive, when you do a hive inspection, I want to see clean white larvae. That means equals healthy larvae. When you look at this, I know that I don't have an Easter or American foul brood or an Easter or a European foul brood disease. I know that the thing is nice and white. There's tons of royal jelly in each one, so now I know I have tons of resources coming in. I have tons of good, healthy nurse bees that are feeding. So these larvae are swimming in copious amounts of royal jelly. So I know I have good, clean brood. There's none of that were yellow or twisted or cappings are sunk in. So it's telling me a telltale sign that I'm doing at least the right thing at that point. Some other things you can do as far as forage, examine your brood. This is going to tell you the difference between feast and famine or we're into a dearth. And what I mean by that is you'll see the eggs, you hear off to the left, and you see these little tiny puddles of royal jelly. This is in August. This would be the resources are drying up, or maybe in your micro environment that things are drying up and you can't run and they're not going to feed. So what's going to happen is that colony keeps getting fed or getting cut back, and then they're going to start eating that larvae and eating that royal jelly out of the cells. The next thing they'll do is they'll start cannibalizing the drones and the brood and eating the vitagelin out of their heads and carting out the bodies, which then everybody thinks they have chalk brood problems. The thing to turn on and do between that and this in July is you could put on some sugar water, put on a little piece of protein patty, and give them enough nutrients to keep them going, to keep your hive going forwards than it is falling back. So even this is good, but it's not great. But you can see the difference between the two. Feeding. Anytime I start up, and one of the questions you guys had that about feeding or starting out with new splits, you want to feed. If it's in the middle of the season where you know everything's in bloom, you drive home different ways all the time and everything's in bloom, the flowers, the trees, start doing some tree identification and some flower and weeds. So identify what's going on and put them in your notes. So anytime I start out with a nuke, which I could have started a split, and then I need to do that. Or did you go out and buy a brand new package? You want to put that feed right on top. A quart, a pint, a 1 gallon pickle jar, anything to get those nurse bees to turn on and start lactating wax, get the brood build up, let them think there's a nectar flow going on in the same way with a package. Because these early packages, we still have these nighttime, overtime drops and things aren't as warm. So things aren't in the flow. Once it starts to get nice out and you see the bees constantly out, you're watching the AccuWeather, you watch GDD and everything's going good, you can pull off that sugar water. A thing for beginners. Your biggest problem is you have all this foundation and no drawn comb. So this is another way to feed them and to get them to lactate wax, the young nurse bees to lactate wax, to turn on and get more drawn comb. When we feed, we're going to feed above the colony. I do not like, and this is just my personal preference, I don't like Boardman feeders that sit out the front, because I start getting in yellow jackets and hornets and bumblebees and other things that want to, or ants. So I like the top feeders. I don't have a lot of these because they do get expensive. Quartz pints and mason jars. I have 1 gallon pickle jars that I get from Shishler Pickle over in Indiana. I buy them by the case. What you can do with a pint or a quart, if you do not know, take that and take a small paneling nail and beat about 8 to 10 holes into it. Before you flip it over, make sure that jar lid is completely tight. So when you flip it over, what's going to happen is it's going to pour out quickly at the beginning, and then it's going to start to slow down, and it's going to create that vacuum. And then, only then, put it above that slot and leave just about a quarter to a half inch so the bees can still get in and out, but you're feeding right above the colony. All the heat from the colony's coming up. It's keeping this nice and warm, and they'll drink that down. If you're going to use pints or quarts, have one on the hive and have one in the house. So when you go out, you're going to put on your veil before you ever open that hive, because it'll be that one girl that's in love with you. She's going to come out and crack you in the head. What to do then is to turn on to take one, switch it out, take that one back in. There's actually other shim feeders. If you have a woodworker in the family or somebody that can make you half-inch shims, here you could turn on, put 4 in. You could put some shims over here, 2 half-inch shims, and put a quart here in the corner, put another one on the other corner, and put one over in the center. So if you have a big colony and they're really taking down the sugar water, you can put 3 or 4 up. Dayton and Man Lake also build it's a square that fits right over the center hole, and it actually holds 4 quarts in the center. If you have access and you have resources to Ziploc bags and things like that, this is just taking a Ziploc bag with sugar water, take an X-Acto blade, put a couple slits into it, and they'll come up, put their tongues in between the slit, and they'll drink that thing completely dry. In a full season, now we have our nuke in our package and it's building. We're feeding. If we're still nice and cold, we can still, there's this colony now, when it gets to that 70-80%, now we want to turn on, put up on another box. If that bottom colony does not have enough room to go out, you're going to start seeing the swarm cells, not a queen cup. So a queen cup, think of it as a coffee cup flipped upside down. There's nothing wrong with it. Different breeds of bees have different amounts of cups. The different population will have different types of cups. You'll see them on the sidewalls. You'll see them inside. They'll cut actually into the brood area and draw one out. They're usually along the bottom. If it's along the top, it's a supersedure cell. It means something happened with the queen. But before this gets to this 70-80%, and when I talk, I teach slots of bees. So if I'm looking down through the top and I'm looking down through all the gaps, if it's over 70 to 80%, I need to get on another box. If not, they're putting in burr comb. Then the queen will, if not, the queen will lay an egg in that cell, and next thing you know, you have a queen cell, and she's gone. That means bad beekeeper, you didn't get that other box on. A way to entice them to come up a little bit is to put feed on the top for a little bit, or, and I'll teach you another method, you can pull up a frame of brood. One of the questions in here was talking about honey production with a queen excluder. I do not use queen excluders, and this is just me specifically. The reason I don't is because I'm constantly having new queens. If I turn on, put an excluder on top of this first box and she's out laying this brood area, it automatically sets them up to swarm. If I do, I put my excluder on my second box, and then I'll put cut comb or put something else that I want up top. But I at least give them 2 deeps or 3 mediums and then use an excluder. I do know people, I have not met anybody personally that uses a single deep brood box and puts a queen excluder on top of it, but I will keep asking around, and if I do, I will guarantee I'll send you an email. But on this third box is usually where you start to see the honey dome. And so the queen's laying in here. These outside frames are always honey and pollen. This top area, everybody knows that little half football where the queen's laying. And it's also an indicator for me that when things get overly packed up, this area is usually normally held open for the queen to lay eggs. If I see wet nectar coming down and squishing this area out, and the queen has nowhere to lay, I know that I'm behind and I need to get on another box. So what I'll do is take this top box off, put another box in between, and lift it up higher. At that point, I would take the feed off, unless you just want bees to be bees. And there are beekeepers that just want some bees in the garden. If it was going to be cold, wet, and rainy for a week, put on a feeder if you want to. You don't have to at that point. But this gives me a good indicator when she starts to see that nectar flow and it's coming down and it's squishing her down and she's stuck down in these bottom boxes or even further down, and these top frames in the brood area is all filled up with pollen or wet nectar, I know I'm behind the 8 ball. So for me, it's a measurement stick. The pyramid style is what was going to show you. So as we started out in that nuke, there's people that put on that second box. So here we started out with our nuke or our package. It got to that 80%, maybe 60% on this one. And people put on a second box, but as a beginner, you put that whole box on and it's all foundation. And then you call an inspector. We have inspectors down here. And then all of a sudden in this first box, they pulled out a couple queen cells and left. When you have an entire box of foundation, especially plastic, if you don't put on the excess wax and do things like that, they're going to go up top. They're going to have tons of room, but they're going to think that they're bottlenecked because they're not going to cross this gap and they're going to get jammed up. And then they're going to go down here and they're going to swarm out. Next thing you know, you go out another week later, half your colony's gone, the old queen's gone, and you have these little tiny queen cells around the outside. So what I do, I call it the pyramid method. Whenever you're inspecting a hive, pull that outside frame first. I'm going to pull these frames over to the gap and lift up. I'm going to find a frame of open brood. I'm going to stick an old foundation frame in that gap back down in the center, put everything together on the bottom box, put my second box on, and put that brood right over the gap that you had with that foundation down below. What it does, the most important thing to the colony besides the queen is brood, open brood, because the nurse bees are actively feeding, they're actively lactating royal jelly, and they're going well. So when they start to come up, by the end of it, you'll see these nurse bees coming up and pyramiding up. On the other side of it, there's too much gap. So now they're secreting wax, they're pulling this side out, they're pulling the other side out, and it starts to build up in this second layer. As where before, if you left everything down below, there was nothing up here for them to do. Now they have a purpose to go back up. And again, this area at the bottom in the gray is usually a transfer area. Sometimes you'll see that almost empty, or you'll see little tiny pellets of pollen. The foragers are coming in and dropping off the pollen here. The house bees are taking it from here and bringing it up in the brood or around the outside periphery of the brood area to feed. So this is how I do my setups. Whenever I pull that up, I've never had a problem with this setup. One of the other questions was about the honey flow, nectar flow. When's to maximize this? It's approximately 6 weeks before the nectar flow goes on full. So we have the winter time when you're inspecting and not doing an open inspection where you're tearing the box open. You're looking in the top. You want to maximize. You want to make sure that the colony's still down deep. If the colony's up top and you open up the inner cover or the telescoping cover and right there's the entire colony, they're starving. So that's the time to do the Hail Mary and throw in some pollen patty or some winter patty, depending on the season. We get into April, we start our spring buildup, and it's maybe a little bit before that, depending on the seasons. Our maples start to pop. Dandelions are my thing when I start to watch that. Then we get into swarm control. That's, for me, every colony I have, I take the old queen away, I put her in a queen castle with 1 or 2 frames of brood, and then I let that colony let it go ahead and supersede, or I graft. When the nectar flow or the honey flow kicks in, and I've heard it called both, so on this slide I just called the honey flow, just before the white Dutch clover, I want the largest buildup. I want this thing looking mammoth, and I want all the gaps filled with bees. And you have to do a balancing act between them flying out and swarming and having enough bees to maximize your honey or your nectar flow. So I want to see frames and frames and frames of capped brood. If you want to, if you're a person that has more than one hive, you can try and take one hive and do splits. So that keeps your numbers up. And you can take all the frames of capped brood, take 2 or 3 frames of capped brood with the nurse bees on it, make sure the queen's not on it, and constantly slam frames of brood into your big one that you want for cut comb or to do to maximize your nectar flow. So you can actually I steal resources back and forth all the time, depending on what I want to do with that colony. If you, Turan, have 5 or 10 hives, you steal 1 frame of brood from each one. You take a 10-frame box of all cat brood, you put it on the colony. You're going to have something that will draw out beautiful, beautiful cut comb. And robbing bees from nukes or other hives increases the numbers, so don't be afraid of doing it. Just remember, when you take that frame of cat brood, double check and make sure you're not stealing the queen from that colony to take it into another hive where she could get slaughtered out. And right about here with the X is where I start in the dandelions. That's my trigger. Right after the maples is when I start to feed copious amounts of pollen. I use the Mega Bee from Man Lake, and I put on about 1 or 2 patties. This year I cut back quite a bit because we had hive beetle that overwintered because our winter wasn't that bad. So right when we go into the wax and honey production, everybody asked about, one of the questions was to maximize the drone comb. This is the time to put in all your foundation right at the beginning of this season, because you're going to have, the only thing that comes out of wax is your young nurse bees. They have to lactate that oil. That Turan dries out into wax flakes. This is only in this season until you pull the honey in this July. If you go putting frames of foundation into this late July and August, then they're going to pull those little tiny teardrops, or they're going to take the frame and pull one side right into the other of that gap. They don't like to start out new stuff. They want to pull out what they have going. So if you have tons of old comb that you threw away, that's that brown, black, dead larvae on it, things like that you went through the wintertime, throw those out. Checkerboard, so you're going to use 1 frame of drone comb, 1 frame of foundation, 1 frame of drone comb, 1 frame of foundation, and checkerboard that box above the brood area so they come up and they start to pull that out. But this beginning of this season and all through this summer, that's the time to turn on, have the maximum amount of foundation build out. When we start getting into July and August, then we have hive beetle. So you don't want to put on extra protein. We start having problems with wax moth. So now we have to have a strong colony to defend off the wax moth. You have to put in beetle jails. A strong colony will take care of those things yourself, unless you have an area that has tons of hive beetle. Last year, the hive beetle beat me up something fierce, about 20, maybe 22, 23 nukes of young starter nukes that I had. I got slimed before I could actually get them done. So the beetles outran me. So I had beetle jails, microfiber, and at night I was going out every 5 days and spraying the ground with a pyrethroid on the ground soak to try to defend them out. By October, you have to have your varroa under check. That means you have to have those varroa down to a 1 or 2 count to turn on and get, because from October, this last year was a little bit different because it was blooms. It was still nice up to November. But October is that area where you want to have everything ready. Once they get into winter, when you're coming out the other side around Thanksgiving or Christmas time, as long as it's over 38 degrees, you can hit them with oxalic. The queen doesn't have brood. Oxalic has a better kill rate. So then you come back into spring. If you need to count, then you can use Mite Away Quick Strips or Formic Pro or Hop Guard. So to get that drone comb, we all want this, and there is no limit on the amount of money that you're not going to get a beekeeper that says, I'll give you 3-4 boxes of drone comb. As foundation, this does nothing for the colony. So imagine having your house built with no cupboards, no storage space. You have all this drone comb. Now there's everything to store everything. There's the place for the queen to lay eggs, to store pollen, for nectar, for bee bread. This right here in this nice yellowish spot, that's what you want, and you want boxes and boxes of it. And the only time to do that is with a young colony and to build up as fast as you can. This is the edge. This is what we want. The spring buildup. I want population. I want to see gap after gap of complete bees. This is on the verge of swarming, but you can also take away, you don't have to split every time or cut this colony in half. Take out 2 or 3 frames of brood and stick in a couple frames of foundation. and cut them back slowly. Give them enough room to move and to keep building, but you're not taking away. At this point, and this was exactly what I just seen 2 days ago when I was in my bees and yesterday, at this point, I would take this colony, an overwintered colony, and check every frame for queen cells. If I was satisfied there was no queen cells, I would take the center 4 or 5 frames of brood, start a nuke with the old queen, give them foundation in the center, and let them rework that, because from the time they have a new queen, so even today's date, you have 16 days for that queen to emerge. At that 16th day, when she emerges, she's got another week and a half for her keratin on her body, her wings to harden off, and to take a maiden flight. 7 to 10 days after that, she has to take a maiden flight. Then she has to come back and lay. So for an entire month and a half for that queen, from the time she was an egg till she comes back and starts laying eggs, if not longer, and this is also weather dependent, from the time she comes back, those bees are building up nectar, pollen, converting it into honey, making bee bread. And when she starts laying, they're screaming for her to lay eggs. And this colony has supposedly, from Mel Dissicone up in your guys' area, when he does OTS that way, he says they'll put on 100 pounds of wet nectar at that point between that whole month and a half if you maximize your output. Going in and looking at your brood, I want to make sure, and we all have queens that we've loved and we had names for them, and Eleanor and Betsy and things like that. But if my queens are not pouring on layers of brood, and I want to see this type of brood in the springtime, you'll see the heater holes, and that's where the young nurse bees go down inside and they'll gyrate and warm up the cells. So you'll see this a little bit. Also, I think that might be somewhere some wires are at, but you'll see that. This is what I want to see, that 10% of drones, that nice honey dome over the top. Don't ever say that 100% the queen will never go above this. I run, last year I ran about 150 hives. The year before that, we ran 200. The year before that, I was around to 300. I've seen the queen open up the telescoping cover or in the inner cover and find the queen right up top in the honey areas. So never say never. But this queen, I do have no problem anymore. If I see this shotgun pattern or this pattern it's not European foul brood, so there's no pinholes, it's not all drones where we had a laying worker, but I see this spotty pattern, it's off with her head and a new queen gets introduced. Do not waste your time, your money, your expenses, and we all know beekeeping's really cheap, right? So you spend an entire year to let Eleanor lay a spotty brood pattern and you got nothing from her. So you need to turn around and do that every time, and have some friends that are you go back to and that are raising queens. Or as they go in the 2.5 model or 2.5 hive model, where you have 2 full-size hives and have yourself a nuke. That nuke for you is resources that you can steal from. You can take her brood away. You can take her pollen away. You can take her everything away and let that queen just use her. If something would happen to Eleanor up here and she's laying a spotty pattern, I could instantly take Eleanor and introduce her back into the colony and save my entire colony. If not, if you don't know how to do that, be friends with a queen rearer or somebody, but you're on our timetable when we have queens. Right now I have probably 45 people plus on my list to get a queen from me. And it's hard to get on somebody's list. So if you do know of somebody, get on their list early. And then at the end of this, I'll show you how to make some nukes and do some other things. And nukes. This is the perfect time to talk about nukes. They're usually, by state standards, they're 5 frames, but there's also 4s and 3s. Whenever you want the most success, so I want to give this nuke the best possible percentage to survive and to brood up and to keep going, I want my 3 frames of brood, I want my frame of pollen and honey, and I want partially drone, not a frame of foundation, but a good drone frame so they have some area to work, but they still have the nurse bees to lactate some wax and to build up some comb. So in these 5 frames, if I have this sitting off to the side, I have options. I could sell it. Right now, nukes for our area are going between 170, 180. When I talked to Rich, there's some people up in Michigan, I heard 210. Down south in Columbus area, they're going for almost 230. So now I could sell this queen. I could sell this nuke and make some money back in your pocket for more bee gear. If all else, if this thing starts to get too many resources and it's getting jammed up, steal 2 frames of brood from her, put it in one of your big nectar and honey pullers, and put 2 frames of foundation back in and let her start over again. Use her up because she's a second-year queen. She's still good, but in that second and third year, what if she runs out of semen? What if she turns around and has a brood disease? Or maybe she just doesn't have enough semen stored to lay a good pattern. If all else, stack another box on top. And who says you can't go a 5/5 or a 5/5/5? Once you start to get 4 of them, then you need a T-post or something because they do get a little wind. I mean, that'd be a time to put a bungee strap, Harbor Freight with a little orange $1.99 in the orange straps, and strap them all up together. Queen cups versus queen cells. One of your questions, one of the other questions was, I just made a split. And what is that going to be one split enough to turn on and keep the queen cells away? It's not. It depends on so many different things. The nectar flow. Are you a good beekeeper? Do you give them enough space, and are you out there enough to manage them? The weather, the dew point, the nectar flow, the flowers, the trees, the shrubs. Remember, a queen cup is just like a coffee cup flipped upside down. You'll find them on the face. You'll see them on the side. You'll see them hanging on the bottom. That is not a problem, depending, like I said before, on the breed of bee, the population. But when I take that frame out, do not cut that down right off the bat until you know you have another queen in there, that the queen is laying. The only way to be able to know that is if you pull the frames of brood out and see eggs and young larvae. Preferably those young eggs that are standing straight up, because you know that queen had laid that egg within the last 24 hours. Pull this frame up. Put the sun over your left or right shoulder, and then look down inside the cell and see if you see the larvae in the puddles of royal jelly. At this point, if you see this little bit, the old queen might be there. That would be the time to tear down the entire colony and find the old queen, take her away, and let them turn around and requeen themselves. Or if it starts to pull down and you see the little hole at the end, this is day 9, right before it's capped. I'll almost 90, it's like 80%. I'll almost say the old queen has already swarmed. And if you look at your notes from the 2 week or the week and a half before, when you check that hive, half that colony, you're going to see maybe 8 frames of bees. Now you're probably going to see 4 frames of bees because she took half the workforce and left. At this point, when it's capped, it's day 16. So you know it's capped and it's ready to go. At that point, if you had that, you know half the workforce is gone, or you found maybe 3 frames with these peanuts on it. I'll show you another method on that. If you pull this out and you see the trap door, so we're all old enough, hopefully, to understand the old can openers where you had to kind of turn them around and kind of cut the can out. If you see this little hole cut out perfectly on the side, not the side on the side of it where she stung her daughter or sister and killed her, but the end tip, if it's chewed out, put that colony completely back together. If you have one here, you can see that it's chewed. She hasn't emerged yet. You would take this frame, shake the bees off, and take her out. Now you have 2 queens. The virgin queen in this colony, put a grease pencil, a Japanese grease pencil right on the top. Do not touch this hive for 2 weeks because you have a virgin queen that's running around trying to spread her QMP, trying to get these girls to like her, that they're going to accept her to be the next queen. This one here that's chewed out, you should all have a handful of JBZs or California queen cages, and you put blue painter's tape on the tip, and I'll show you some tips on that. Save that queen because that's another one you could try and make another split from. So we've all seen this type of scenario. I see it all the time. Just like the second one to the right, one's completely capped and she has another queen cup she never laid an egg in. But at this point along the bottom, that queen is probably gone. Something happened and she's out. Different options for nukes. You have the 5 frame. You have the Michael Palmer 4/4. This queen goes out the front. This one comes out the back, or vice versa. My queen castles have 3. So this queen off to the left, she comes out the front left. The one in the middle goes out the back. This one goes out the right. And everybody asks, on the front, do these 2 fight? If you can imagine painting a line in imagination line right down the center. You'll see foragers or guard bees come out the front. They'll stand off here. The ones on the left will come out and stand here, and they all just sit and look at each other, and they come in and out. They don't even bother each other. The reason I have these options are if I find a queen cell and my colony's still doing well, or I find multiple queen cells on multiple frames, take a frame of brood. Now I can have 1, 2, 3 different queens in this one. If you do 4/4, I can save those 2 frames, leave 1 frame for the old colony to requeen, and I can just save my resources and I can split my colony down. But remember, when you're doing it with 2s and 3s, the more queens you want to raise is the more resources you have to take from the original colony. Every time you take resources away from it, that's your honey production or your nectar flow that's going to get cut down. So just know, the more times you want to keep doing splits, I got away from 5 frames because if I wanted to make a split, I had to put all 5 frames in. Then I went with the 4/4. It's a little bit less. I like the 3s. If this queen in a 3 frame really does well, guess what? She gets graduated. She gets to a condominium. If she gets into a condominium, she does a 5/5 and she does another 5/5. Then she graduates to a full-size colony. So for me, it's management. It's moving them around all the time. Here's a tip and trick. It would cost you. So I made this up years ago, and everybody kind of flipped about it. What do you do if you see multiple queen cells on 1 frame? What I'm going to do is you're going to take number 8 wire, put it on the end of a 2x4, a little chunk of wood. The sides of this are going to be at least 2 inches tall. So you're going to bend these little frames. I got entire boxes full of them, all different shapes and sizes. If I pull out a frame and I see all of these queen cells, and I'm talking queen cells that I want to see bigger around, if not bigger than my pinky. So if you have these big fat queen cells, they're there, and you don't want to cut them down. You want to try and put them into a colony. You want to try to save them, but they're just barely capped or done. As long as they're all capped, put the cage on it. And you can even cage workers or young nurse bees underneath with them, and they will help take care in the heat and help take care of that queen. What's going to happen is the first one out, she's only going to be able to run around this area. So when you take this cage, shove it all the way down into the foundation. If you don't shove it down far enough, they'll chew out the outer edge and crawl up inside and slaughter this queen out. So this is what I've done on one side. This is what I've done on the other. And then what I do, put this in a queenless colony. So for me, it's a nuke. Put in frames of brood. Here's my queen cells on here. I had one on this side, one here, one here. On this side, 2 and 2. I dump in nurse bees from other donor colonies. So what I do is I go over and pull a frame of brood out, open brood. I find all the nurse bees on it. Do not smoke it because you'll just chase them off. Check for the queen. Once I'm satisfied the queen's not there in, say, hive A, then I come over to my cell builder and I shake all the nurse bees in here until every gap is full of bees. And they're trying to keeping this nice and warm. They're feeding each other, and I'm getting tons of nurse bees. Because if I go back one, when this queen comes out, the nurse bees are going to feed her through the cage. And she can't go anywhere. So she's just going to be right here. And you're going to check this every 4 to 8 hours. You're going to stimulate over the top. You can put a feeder, a 1-to-1 sugar water. I around say 4 to 8. You can check it every 8 hours. And as they emerge, they're going to be in that little tiny cage. You can turn on and pick her up. And to practice with that, practice picking up drones with your bare fingers or wear surgical nitrile gloves. If you can pick up drones, pick them up by the back of the abdomen and the wings, pick them up, flip them around, set them back down. If they can walk away and take off on flight, you're good. Your next level experience, pick up workers. Here's the risky point. If you pick them up wrong, the tips of your fingers are going to hurt. So practice over and over. Get the feel of the touch of squeezing them enough to hold them, but not squeezing them enough to turn around and squash them. For the fact, when you pick up a queen, if you pick her back by the thorax or the abdomen and you squeeze her too hard, she will not lay eggs after that. They will end up cutting her up, and they'll have her as an inferior queen. And then what I do, I can actually take a frame away. If these cages are too big, don't be afraid of pulling a frame away and just using that gap for that space, because you want to be able to pull these cages out without tearing off. And again, here's where I start with another 11 gaps on a 10 frame box, 9 gaps on an 8 frame box. Start out another nuke. How can I get the buildup? So some people asked on one of your questions was, and after I do my splits, how do I build those back up? You're back to a beginner beekeeper. Even I, with 10 years experience, I have to go back to being the foundation. Remember, put the feet on top, small front reducer, and let this colony build. When it gets up to that 80% again, now I see all these gaps the bees are full. Pull the feet away, put on another box, take number 5 or 4 frame of brood, put it in the next box, and build back up again. So this is, you're just doing this cycle over and over. But remember, the fundamentals on this is you're trying to get the maximizing production, the maximizing feed, without leaving on sugar water all the time. And people say they'll leave sugar water on 24/7 and then say, I got this great honey. Well, you don't. You have sugar water honey. So this is one of the stands out in front of my barn. These are all my young queens that I've caught or mated, and they're going out for mating flights. It's called a fly cutter. You put it on a drill press, and it cuts exactly the dimensions of a feeder jar for a mason jar. You shove it down in top. Notice the front entrances are all very small. Remember, small colony, small front door. If I come out here and find thousands of bees trying to go in and there's a traffic jam, then you can flip that thing over and give them more room. And then what I do then is I just take another box and put it back on the top and let this go up 3 high. So I have a 5/5/5. If those 15 frames look good, I have a good laying queen. I liked her genetics. I like the way she's pulling in. I don't like running queens. And what I mean by that is when you take a frame and lift it up, if they're running around in havoc, off with her head. That is a calmness type thing. I want the queen that walks past, looks at me, and says, hey, I'm going to lay this egg and keep right on moseying along. I want nice, gentle bees, because these bees, I don't have all these colonies. I raise bees for bees. So for me as a beekeeper personally, I don't like honey, because every time I have a frame of honey, I have to extract it, and that's one less frame of bees that I have, or with brood. Some of the other things you can do with this, if you have a nuke, so here's my 3 frames of brood. I just found a queen cell. So here's let's just say that's that one. I went around, all of a sudden now I have 2 or 3 hives, and I found another queen cell. 3 frames of brood, start another colony. What if you wanted to purchase a queen? Now you want to go out and find a queen breeder who has Italian traits, or Carnolians, or Cardovans, or you want to get some VHS queens from Purdue College. Now you can purchase a queen. If you already have a purchased queen, that means she's mated, you can go down and give her less brood, because she's going to instantly get in there and start laying. Then I would give her a frame of foundation at that point, because she's going to go out, she's going to lay right off the bat, she's going to lay nurse bees, and it gives them something to work on. But at least 1 solid frame of honey and 1 of pollen. Or a purchase cell, where you go out and buy a cell from somebody. In our area, cells are very cheap. They're about $6 to $7, depending on the queen breeder. At that point, this would be a very strong colony with tons of brood, pollen, and nectar. And then put the cell in between the frames here and start another colony off and running. So you can build these up. Also remember, with nukes, this is something you're going to need to get into at least every week. If not, you're going to have some problems. It'd be something that I would have near my house or in an out yard that you can visit quite a bit. But at the potential of having $180 for each one of these hives, there's money back in my pocket. But remember, this is my call. Beekeeping is about 3 things: money, which we all know we need; time. Do you have the time to be a good beekeeper and to keep things in the positive? Stay above your brood, stay above your building. Are you doing the right thing? Are you keeping above the disease? Are you keeping in front of it? And resources. For me, I used to build all of my own equipment. I don't do it anymore because I don't have time. So that's more time that I have, but more expense. So balance this out to what you can fit those 3 into and be a good beekeeper. Your nukes, they're just valuable tools. You can hold and replace queens. You can break the brood cycle, increase apiary, resource supplies. If you have a poor queen All I have to do now is take this nuke, put it back in my full-size colony, and it's a way to control swarming. And you'll see and I'm a famous person for Harbor Freight, so you'll see the $1.99 orange packages. Everybody gets a wrap and a strap because of higher winds, and I've went out before and had colonies tipped over, so everything gets wrapped and strapped right to the frame. These are 4x4 stands that come across. These are 10-footers. If you're going to put 3 large colonies, I would go no more than 8 feet. I have 14-footers that go out, but those all get nukes. If you want to raise multiple queens, where can you store them at? Right above a queenless colony. Enter on. These are all my queens I raised once. You turn on, put them all in here. All these nurse bees come up and they feed all these queens, so I can bank them in here for up to 24 days. Every 24 hours, though, you need to turn on and replace this. You need to put in more frames of brood, put in more 1-to-1 sugar water, put in pollen patty, and feed these queens. So when I have 10 or 15 extra queens, I can build this thing up. And what you do is you take the 1.5-inch shim. This is I think that's a shallow box. You can use a 1.5-inch or 2-inch shim. Fill this thing entirely with nurse bees and emerging brood. They come up and feed these nurse bees, and now when each person comes over to buy a queen, I have them right up top. I can grab 2 or 3 at a time. Here you go, and off and running. So if you raise 2 or 3 queens, same thing. You could do this in a nuke. Make sure it's queenless, and Tehran, put your queens right above the top. They'll come up and feed, and you can keep them. After 24 days, though, her sexuality starts to shrink down. Her fallopian tubes on both sides start to shrink. Even if she went out and took a mating flight at that point, she's going to come back and lay an inferior pattern. So I only bank these up to 2 weeks, and then they're done. Somebody talked about handling queens. You'll see my nitrile gloves, and you can see my fingernail around the outside edge. Remember, pick up drones first. If you can pick up drones and safely put them back down, let them go, then go on to workers. If you can do that and feel that touch, don't do this with leather gloves. I've tried it over and over. You can't feel the pressure, and it takes very little pressure to crush these queens out. You'll see my racing numbers. I put on some when I go to Purdue. I put on numbers so I know the insemination that I do with them. But you just pick them right up. You can hold them this way. I'd prefer to hold them from the top, but I can roll my knuckle back and put it above her head. When you take the paint daubers, and we all have the paint daubers that we've seen, daub it on the woodwear or something off the side, your old jeans, your paint, your bee suit, because when you daub that down, you want this nice little square or circular dot on her back. I don't want to see paint running over her eyes, back over her wings. So when you test that, pump that pen about 4 to 5 times and start making some dots. So for every dot that you're going to put on her, you're going to practice that dot 10 times. And then put that right on her. The color for this year is green, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken on that. But then you can also put on glue. It's tight bond too. You put a little dab of it on and put on numbers. And they sell at Man Lake, and most manufacturers have that. So when you have the queens, you just treat them very gentle, and it takes practice. If you squeeze her too much with gloves, she'll walk crooked. She won't walk right. They'll turn on and call her an inferior queen and kill her. With queen production, it's about constantly feeding the nurse bees and getting them to get up to the cage. And how you can entice that, take honey, you mix it with powdered sugar and make this gooey slime and shove it into the screen, shove that on top of the queenless colony, and here's the nurse bees. They don't know that queen, that there's a queen in there. What they're coming up first for is the honey and the powdered sugar, and it's called queen candy. And once they start to feed, then she'll start piping, and you'll hear, if you ever raise queens and hear queens pipe, put 5 or 6 of them beside each other, and you'll get 2 or 3 that really start to sing to you. They're down here, and they're starting to eat. They'll actually get the nurse bees to try and feed them through the cage. And this is what I want to see. I want to see tons of nurse bees where I can take my finger and kind of slowly move them off, but they'll jump right back on to feed that queen. That is a well-fed queen. I know she's doing well, and then I can sell her and say, yes, I had a positive queen. We all have JBZs. We've had the 3-hole or the California. It's the same setup. If you decide to put one of these or buy one, I always like to throw this into a PowerPoint because I have people who buy a queen and install it the wrong way and lose it. So when we talk JBZs, the snout is facing up. You can take a toothpick. The precaution on the toothpick, do not shove the toothpick through the queen and out the other side of the cage. She does no good for you at that point. And I've had people call me and go, I think I hit the queen. And they've usually caught one of her legs or something else. So what you do is in between the frames, put the toothpick, the snout is up facing the inside, and this is in the center of the colony. I want to keep the warmth in here. I want to keep the nurse bees in here. My rule is on the 3rd day, you're going to take a toothpick or something else and snap that off or shove that candy through and let that queen just walk out. Lay it on the top of the frame, let her walk out, walk down inside. Your job is done. Anything over 3 days, they start to propolize these slots closed because it's what they do, and they'll actually starve her out on the inside. I've had people call me back after 10 days and go, they propolized everything closed and my queen is dead on the inside. Day 3 is to release them. Same way with the, my one picture didn't show up. I apologize. Same way with the Californias. I want to see that screen and I want that snout facing the center. If I can see her, I know the nurse bees can see her and get her fed. Same thing. 3rd day, take that little black tube, yank that out, set it on the top bar, and let her walk on out. When you're grafting, Ohio State has one. I'll send it to Carrie. There's a list, and if you have an Excel or have access to an Excel sheet, this tells you exactly the timetable. So at the top, I can put in the date and time, and it tells me exactly what's going to happen. When should I check for eggs? When is she going to take a mating flight? And it's all science. So I know from the time she lays an egg, I'm going to graft on the 3rd day, and then it goes down through the entire timetable and fills in all those dates. So every time you graft or you try and have a cell and want to do this, you could have a piece of paper, have your folder, and you know exactly when those timetables are going to happen. If you like to be a little bit techie or geeky, this is the app that I run. It's called QR Mobile. Every time I graft, I can put pull line queens. Those are the ones I went down and did artificial or instrumental insemination on. I grafted them with a red cap, and it tells me, and then right here, it tells me everything that's going to happen. And it tells you can have a wake-up call at 5 o'clock in the morning if you're an early riser, or like me at 8. And this turns around and gives you an alarm, and it tells me exactly what I need to do. Do I need to go out and check those queens for laying? Are they going to emerge today, and what's going to happen? So if you like this kind of app, you want something that you want to try and get on a little timetable with, this is a nice app. The shareware version, you can only do 2 queens at a time or 2 different lines. The full version costs you a whole $2, and you can get the full version, and then it's yours for life. Some ways to graft, and there were some in there that asked about grafting queens and doing different stuff. The reason I started out in cell punch, and that was just one of the classes that I took. There's quite a bit to learning it, but that's one way. But what your foundation looks like, it looks like Swiss cheese because you're warming up this brass ring with a little bit of fire. You're melting through and hopefully never touching that egg that's on that inside. It takes tons of practice. You guys happen to have Mel Disicone. I love this guy to death because I took my apiary in my 2nd and 3rd year, went from like 10 or 15 hives, went to 45 and 60 within the 2nd year. It's a great book. It's a little bit of expensive. It's like $70 or $80, but it shows you how to take the hive tool. You're notching down along the bottom, not touching the eggs. You take the old queen away, and they're using the bees and the workers of a strong force to raise more bees. It's a little bit slower way to do it, but it's surefire. And it easily 80-90% success. You're breaking the Varroa count all the time, or the Varroa buildup. You're running cutting down your numbers, but you can actually do different things, and there's all kinds of different options in that book. So if you haven't got that book, one of you buy it and put it in the bee club, and then you kind of have a library, but read the book. It is very good if you want to go that direction. Grafting is called the NICOT system. I had it for years, had no success at it because what you actually do, you take this, you shove it inside, you put your queen inside, she lays eggs, you take the little eggs out of the cups, you put them into another bar, and it's a lot of transferring. It's a very slow method for me. I bought it for $100 some odd, and I ended up giving it away for like $20 to somebody. So there's the NICOT system. If you have used it, I congratulate you. But you have to put them in cups, flip them over. There's all kinds of things to do with it. I've not found too many people that do it that way, but if you're successful at it, congratulations. The Miller method is actually taking a frame of eggs, and when this entire thing is eggs, you just take a hot knife or a utility knife and cut these back into it back and forth. You take the old queen away. The Miller method done this back in 1911, and then what happens is along the periphery, you have queen cells all around the outside. Then take a knife and you can cut this out and take take two queen cells. Take 2 queen cells and put them in each one of your nukes. And it's an easy way. You didn't have to graft. You didn't have to do anything. You just took the old queen away and wasted 1 frame of eggs. So it's an easy way to do it. My personal method is Doolittle. This is where you have to have some really good eyesight, or cheaters or bifocals or trifocals that I have. What I do is I take a bar, I put it on a 3/8 spacer, graft these little eggs. I use the German tool, which is here, the metal tool. They have the Japanese tool, but when these are micro eggs, when they just emerge on that 36 hour, I want to graft these. I put them in a cup. I put them along a bar. I make the hive queenless with tons and tons of support bees. I'm talking an entire 10/10 colony with nothing but nurse bees. So if you don't have that kind of thing, this is a little bit harder to do. You can do it with a nuke and do right here. I proved it with this. I had 2 queens. I just raised 2 cells and a 5-frame nuke. They did quite well. The only thing I didn't like about this is they didn't have enough royal jelly, and I cannot remember if I kept those queens or not. But this is a good way to see these cups. You want this cup completely full of royal jelly. So as she's here as a larvae, she's eating. By the time she drops, I still want to see royal jelly in this top, so I know she wasn't starved out or she's not going to be deficient as far as being a quality queen. Here's the eggs. That's when I want to graft, and this is really zoomed in. If you have young people or you have women who do needlepoint and things, those are the people you want to be your grafters. I teach a grafting class that Dwight Wells and I travel around to. If you're going to do that, take a class and learn. Grafting for pennies. This is Randy Oliver's method. What he does, he takes a frame of brood and pollen and honey. He takes his hive tool and scratches that whole entire center out, right down to the foundation. He puts in 4 cups. He grafts the larvae inside each cup, and that's exactly what you end up with. You'll end up with your own little tiny honey production, or your own little queen production, and you're doing it on a very little scale. You don't have to have big cell builders. You don't have to have all the stuff, but you can learn how to graft on a smaller scale and have 4 queens. So right there you go. And it's called Queens for Pennies. It's Randy Oliver's scientific beekeeping website. So grafting in JBZ bars. And this is my picture, and this is my claim to fame. This is my first year, and that's been 8 years ago, so now it's about 12 years ago. I grafted with Dwight Wilson. Dwight Wilson, for those of you that don't know him, he's been beekeeping over 50 years. He runs around 180, 190 colonies. I mentored with him for 3 years solid. I work my tax season in the wintertime, and during the summer, I spend 6 to 7 days a week with Dwight. This was my first time grafting. I had 1 queen out of 45 that emerged. That wasn't chewed down or anything else. 8 years later from that picture, this is what I do now. So I want these nice big cells. I want multiple cells. And even as a pro, you're still going to miss some. So they chewed this one out. They chewed that one out. There's a couple in between. But this is what I do over and over and over. And that's just practice, practice, practice. This is what you want. At the end of the day, when you're getting good at this, you want your own resources. Each one of these, there's 23 in a row, or excuse me, there would be 22 in here because 21 to a 3. So there's 23 queens. I put them in a queenless colony. I built a little special jig for them to slide down into. The nurse bees feed them, and then I can make splits anytime I want. And remember, don't hold them more than 21 days. And then you just put in queen candy. You keep this thing fed all the time. Anybody can do it. Here's Dwight and I giving a Maumee Valley beekeeping up in Toledo, Ohio, Swanton area. We're actually teaching people how to do OTS, and we're teaching them the Doolittle method. So this is another thing that I do. It's a 2-day class. The first day is half of it's PowerPoint, half of it's grafting, and everybody has a crazy, crazy time trying to graft. The second day, when we come back, we go over those fine points again, and then the second day you graft again. The second day is everybody has great success because they've got it down. They've worked out the bugs overnight. They're asking questions. So there's another. And everything with beekeeping, I cannot stress this enough, is analyze. Record everything you do with a journal, a notepad, a computer, a cell phone. And we all have cell phones that you can turn on, record your voice, put it in your front pocket, go out to the apiary. As you're seeing things in your hives, record those notes. When you go out there next time, put them into a hard drive, put them on copy paper. Anything you can do. As you have that journal, that is what's dictating to you, are you a good beekeeper? Don't try to keep up with the Joneses. Don't ask, are you keeping 100 hives and I'm keeping 5 and I'm not doing something wrong? At the end of the day, look in the mirror and go, yeah, I'm keeping my bees, my queens. They're treated like royalty. They're good. I have not had problems with European foul brood. I don't have hive beetle problems. I don't have this. And I'm doing the best by my bees. Because in the end of it, we're all in this together, but we're also helping each other. And if you have that good information, then go back to your club officers and say, I see this and why. I'm not having a good success at this and why. And when they ask you, well, what are you doing? You can go back to your notes and say, this is what I'm doing and this is the science behind it. And they can give you good information. If you can't give and explain good information to them and what you're doing, they're just like garbage in, garbage out. If you give them great information in, you're going to get great information out. And ask your local beekeepers first. Because of the microenvironments, don't follow somebody on YouTube that does it down in Florida. Or don't follow somebody that's out in California. Everything you start getting further and further away from your home environment, the amount of forage is different for your bees. The nectar source is different for your bees. I would not imagine to do bees down here because I don't have the blueberries and things. A lot of our trees are the same and our environment's a little bit different, but I'm 2 weeks ahead of you that it is down in Cincinnati. They're 4 weeks ahead of me. So try to ask questions and get good science behind it. I'm going to flip over to some question and answer, and I'm going to keep everybody muted for a second because I did not look over here. Evaporating for the win. Let me go through some of these questions. Sorry about that. The webinar site. Notification webinars. Let me see. Starbucks. Single deeps. Okay. Devin, thank you for that. Devin Rawl, a Canadian beekeeper, uses single deeps with QE on top. That is, I might have to look that up myself. I put out from Carrie, I put Mega Bee in dry form and patties. No one is taking it. If they quit taking it, this is something that I start to feed in early March and April. If they quit taking it, that means there's something out there that's better. For everything that we give them, I mean, it might be Mega Bee, fondant, 1-to-1 sugar water. The bees in your colony will not take it down, or they might it's like kids in a cookie jar. But for bees, they want the real thing. They want the real nectar. They want the real pollen. If the bees are not eating on it after 4 to 5 days, take it out and make sure you're not growing hive beetles. Make sure there's not little micro holes crawling in and out of that pollen patty that you put in the spring. So it's just something to look at. If they want it, if there's a dearth and that's up there and you've got left it, don't be afraid to leave in a little bit and let them take it down. From Ryan B, throw some bees in from each hive into the dry feeder. No dames. Michael Palmer method. I love that method. The 4/4s. A nuke making party. Oh, I'd love to join that. Handy sheets at JBZ Cage. Yes, they have a lot of good information on their cages and doing stuff like that. Android been updated. Okay, the Queen Rearing mobile app. If it has not been updated, and I do not know because I just updated mine when I got a new phone here about 2 months ago. If it's not, write to the gentleman who runs the page or runs the app, excuse me, and he will update it within a day or two. What about the simple using the NICOT setup to graft into? You could. There's a lot of guys who have these home, not CNC, but the home plastic makers, the like the roller cages and stuff. There's different cages and stuff that they've been using to run the NICOT system in that they graft into. They have good success. There's some people using the JBZ cage with the Japanese hair rollers, so the queen has more room to run around. Yeah, any combination like that you like, go ahead and use it. I mean, don't try to keep up, like I said, with the Joneses. What I do, I use the JBZ or JBZ cups, and then I take a 5/8 drill bit with a taper bit, and then I run it down into a California cage and put it that way. So when she emerges, she's only in a little tiny California cage. I can take the JBZ off, put wax over the top, and then I have it. But it's what I have, and it's what I got the resources for. Ryan B, timing is everything. I will say that with an absolute. When the queens emerge on the 16th day, they don't care if you're out for a family vacation. They don't care if you're out eating dinner with the wife. So if you turn around and do that, make sure that on the 16th day that you're there making splits and making nukes on the 14th day so you can get them queen cells in those colonies by the time that she emerges on the 16th. And remember, if you have an entire box of 16 cells and one queen she emerged early, you're gonna have a box of one queen instead of 16. The first queen that comes out is going to slaughter and kill every other queen. All right. Thank you for all the information.
As we're going after the live chat. If you're not responding in line in the timeline,
yes. And what I'll do, I'll unmute the mic since we have a small group. And if anybody has any other questions.
I do. I've got one. So I've had poor success inserting the hardware cloth cages into foundation, regardless of what type it is. It seems like my bees are very eager to get underneath those cages. Within 24 hours, I've had those cages pried loose. So did you say you recommend getting out to check on those like you said 4 hours once you're hitting emergence day, or 4 to 8 hours? Or
when I know they're capped, and you'll see the tip of it that's being chewed out. So you'll see on that queen cell on the very tip that it's starting to get thinned out, and you'll see the rest of the little bit of the cage itself. What you can do is then I start to run checking everything and I close it up. So if I know I have a frame and they're all about the same age, they're all capped or they're all starting to thin, then I start checking every 8 hours. I use the number 8 hardware cloth, and I press it all the way down. I mean, I hold you have to hold one side to hold the other, but I've been in your situation. If you don't shove it all the way down in, the bees will eat all the wax out from the edge, and then also you see the cage laid in the bottom.
I followed specifically Steve Tillman's advice with the measurements and everything, soldered the cages, pressed them all the way down.
Yep.
And those bees are super, super eager to pry those cages out. I've had them eat away the size of those cages within 24 hours, and they're just all falling off.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Really, really fast.
Wow.
So I don't even bother.
You have some chewing. You have some chewing hygienics.
I just couldn't believe it, because I tried to cap a few cells like that. I don't even try to, if I notch some frames and I'm making cells that way, I don't even bother anymore. I just cut the extra cells out.
Really? Wow.
Yep, I don't even bother.
I taught some people down here how to do that, and now I have some people that'll come back to me and go, "Hey, I got 16 queens in this queenless colony. Now what do I do?" And I said, well, take that colony. Once they emerge, turn around and call people from the club first and offer that you have 16 queens. And if they're virgins, offer them at $10, because now you're not taking the risk of going out and putting them in a breeder box and going out in a nuke and in the whole 9 yards. Just sell them for cheaper. And now we have people that show up the clubs, or we'll turn on, put it on Facebook that so-and-so's got 8 queens and they're gone within, I mean, because one person might only have 1 or 2 hives, it's somebody else that might have 5 or 6, or somebody else that says, hey, I want to raise a couple nukes. And then they have the resources for it.